Maya Dawson had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm, to manage any situation, and to maintain control. With over 12 years of experience as a senior flight attendant for Horizon Airlines, she knew the routine like the back of her hand. The pre-flight checks, the boarding process, the safety announcements, everything had become second nature. Yet, in the chaos of an unusually full flight, Maya felt something in the air that day. She couldn't explain it, but something was off. As the passengers filed into the plane, Maya noticed her first-class cabin filling up. Everything seemed normal at first. The first-class section, always a mix of the elite and the everyday traveler, was buzzing with energy. The usual business types, a few celebrities, and, as always, the older couples who always seemed so at ease in their expensive seats. But then, a woman caught Maya's attention. The woman was different. Maya didn't know why it struck her so suddenly, but something about her didn't fit. She wasn't dressed for the part. The usual polished appearance of first-class passengers was missing. The woman's clothes were fine but unremarkable. An old sweater, simple jeans, and a scarf that was loosely tied around her neck. She carried a handbag that looked like it had been through a lot, the stitching coming undone in places. Her name was Claire Winslow. Maya didn't recognize her at first. There were no familiar luxury brands, no telltale signs of high society. In fact, if anything, the woman looked slightly out of place. But it wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way she carried herself. Claire moved with a quiet dignity, but there was something else. Something Maya couldn't quite pinpoint. It was a feeling, one that had taken root in Maya's mind before she even realized it. By the time Claire reached her seat, Maya had already glanced at the boarding pass. There was a brief moment of hesitation. First class. Something didn't sit right with her. Maya's hand tightened around the clipboard, and she approached Claire's row. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said with a smile, though her tone was firmer than she intended. "I believe you're in the wrong seat." Claire looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion, but she didn't say anything at first. She glanced at the boarding pass and then back at Maya. "I don't think so," Claire said slowly, her voice soft but steady. "I'm in 1A, just like it says here." Maya could feel a small twinge of annoyance creeping in. She had dealt with this before. Passengers often made mistakes or tried to move into a better seat when the plane was less than full. But today was different. She didn't know why, but it was. "I'll have to double-check," Maya said, trying to keep her voice neutral, though a touch of irritation slipped through. She was already imagining the conversations with her manager, the way she'd have to explain this if it escalated. The last thing she wanted was to have to deal with a confrontation. But as Maya glanced at the seat allocation, a thought occurred to her, unbidden but forceful. Something about Claire's appearance made Maya feel uncomfortable, unsure. The woman didn't belong in first class. The thought was a fleeting one, but it was enough to push her forward. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move," Maya said, her voice taking on a tone that was firmer than she intended. She placed her hand on the seat's armrest, trying to convey authority, but her mind was elsewhere, racing, already anticipating the passenger's resistance. "Ma'am, you can't just..." Claire began to protest. Maya's patience was wearing thin. "Please step aside so I can make sure everything is in order," she insisted, her voice becoming sharper. Claire didn't move immediately, and that was the tipping point. In the heat of the moment, Maya made a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. She didn't stop to think, didn't pause to reconsider her actions. Instead, she reached for Claire's arm, as though moving her was her duty, her right. Claire jerked her arm back in surprise. The motion was sudden and sharp, but it was the look on her face that stopped Maya in her tracks, a look that conveyed nothing but quiet confusion. Claire wasn't angry. She wasn't even offended, not in the way Maya had expected. But the damage had already been done. Maya had crossed a line, one that wasn't just about her job. It was something far more personal. And though she didn't understand it at the time, her mind was already making excuses, twisting the situation into something that made sense to her. She was just following protocol, she told herself. She had done nothing wrong. Claire must have been mistaken. The rest of the flight proceeded as planned. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had broken, though she couldn't identify what it was. The passengers remained silent, watching the exchange with an unsettling stillness, but their eyes were on her. Every glance felt like judgment. And in that moment Maya realized, though she couldn't yet put it into words, that she had made a choice. A choice driven by something inside her she had never fully acknowledged, a bias she had never even questioned. By the time the plane landed, Maya had convinced herself that everything was fine. It was just a minor issue, a miscommunication. But deep inside she knew something was wrong. The discomfort she had tried to ignore was now impossible to dismiss. As the plane emptied, Claire walked past Maya, her expression unreadable. There was no confrontation, no shouting, just a quiet, dignified exit, as though the entire incident had been a mere blip on her radar. But Maya's heart hammered in her chest as the door closed, locking her in a quiet, terrifying silence. She had no idea yet how much of an impact that one decision would have on her life. The moment the cabin emptied, Maya Dawson stood alone amid the faint hiss of the air conditioning and the soft hum of the jet's engines winding down. The overhead bins snapped shut one last time, and the cabin lights dimmed. She inhaled a shaky breath, her uniform suddenly feeling rigid and suffocating. For a heartbeat she thought she might faint, but instead she forced herself to take control. Slowly she moved through the rows, straightening pillows, folding blankets, pressing tray tables back into place. Each step reverberated with the memory of her hand on Claire Winslow's arm, the sharp intake of breath from nearby passengers, and the silent dignity in Claire's eyes as the woman rose to disembark without protest. The ritual of closing the cabin should have been soothing, familiar territory on autopilot, but today it felt like scrubbing away a stain that wouldn't wash out. At the front galley, her colleague Diego Lopez glanced up as she passed. His face fell for a fraction of a second before he masked it with a neutral nod. No words were exchanged, but Maya felt the question in his eyes. What happened up there? She gave him a tight smile and hurried past, ignoring the ache in her chest. The deplaning staff ushered the last of the passengers into the jet bridge. With a final sweep of her HID badge, Maya locked the cabin door and turned to face the empty seats. They looked ordinary now, but earlier they had been a courtroom, benches of silent witnesses to her mistake. She swallowed hard, her throat tight with an emotion she neither wanted nor could name. Back in the crew corridor, the post-flight bustle was in full swing. Carts rattled down the aisle, passengers' luggage tumbled off the belt, flight plans were changed for the next leg. Maya headed for the crew room at the very end of the terminal, her footsteps echoing hollowly. She pushed through the door and paused. The chatter stopped. 7 pairs of eyes lifted to her, then quickly looked away. The air felt thick, charged. She could almost hear the unspoken judgment. Asterisk, she overreacted. Asterisk. Asterisk. Did you see how she handled that passenger? Asterisk. Asterisk. I heard it went viral. Asterisk. She dropped her bag onto a locker bench, careful not to slam it. Heart pounding, she closed her eyes and leaned back against the lockers. Minutes passed in silence before Captain Reed, a man whose easy smile usually made her feel safe, stepped in. He gave her a long look, then cleared his throat. "Maya, we need to talk," he said softly, gesturing toward the quiet corner of the room. She followed him, each step heavier than the last. He waited until they were alone. "I saw what happened," he began. "Claire Winslow is a major shareholder in the company. You know who she is, right?" Maya's stomach dropped. I didn't realize," she stammered. She wanted to say she was sorry, that she never meant to humiliate anyone, but the words stuck in her throat. Reed's face was grave but not unkind. "The airline has launched an internal review. HR will contact you." He paused. "I know you're good at this job. We all do. Just be ready." She nodded numbly. He patted her shoulder and left. Maya sat down on the bench, her uniform suddenly too tight. She closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. That night sleep was impossible. Home, the silence pressed in. The bedroom stood unchanged since morning. Her neatly pressed pajamas on the chair, the duvet folded back. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she was back in first class, the rigid click of Claire's cane echoing, her own heart hammering at the humiliation she had caused. She scrolled her phone, hoping for distraction, but found nothing but news alerts. Flight attendant under investigation after slapping billionaire passenger. Airline faces PR crisis. Her chest tightened. She set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling, images replaying in her mind like a cruel slideshow. By dawn, she was at her desk in the HR office, the antiseptic smell sharper than jet fuel. The walls were a bland gray, and the only window looked onto a brick courtyard. 2 HR representatives sat across from her, one with a gentle face, the other with wire-rimmed glasses and a stack of files. They explained the process. A formal interview, collection of witness statements, review of security footage, and a meeting with senior management. Maya listened in a daze, nodding at intervals, her palms sweaty. Finally, they offered her a moment to speak. She took a steadying breath. I'm truly sorry, she began. I made an assumption based on how she looked. I should have checked her ticket properly. No one deserves to be treated that way. Her voice wavered, but she continued. I want to learn why I reacted like that, to understand my bias so it never happens again. The HR rep with the wire rims studied her, then exchanged a glance with her colleague. Thank you for your honesty, the gentle one said. We'll be in touch about next steps. Walking back to the crew quarters, Maya felt a strange shift inside. Part relief, part dread. She had confessed, but now the real work awaited. Unraveling the biases she had never acknowledged, facing the possibility that she might lose the career she loved. And somewhere in that fear lay a spark of resolve. If she could confront this mistake honestly, perhaps she could emerge stronger on the other side. But first, she would have to stay awake long enough to face tomorrow. Maya hadn't expected the weight of silence to feel so heavy. The next few days crawled by in a blur of endless emails, shifting schedules, and quiet glances from her colleagues. It was as though the air around her had thickened, the simple act of passing someone in the hallway becoming a tightrope walk, each of them avoiding her gaze, unsure of how to act. She knew they all had their own thoughts about what had happened. Some felt the sting of betrayal, others the cold discomfort of witnessing something personal unfold in front of them. But none of them spoke a word, as if pretending it had never happened was easier than acknowledging the raw truth hanging in the air. The interview with HR had been excruciatingly thorough. Maya had tried her best to present herself as genuine and remorseful, though part of her felt as if she were trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. They had asked her to explain every step of her actions on that fateful flight, why she had assumed Claire Winslow didn't belong in first class, why she had touched the passenger, why she had allowed her frustration to spill over. But the hardest question had come last. What made you think Claire Winslow wasn't deserving of her seat? The HR rep had asked, their voice calm, even a little clinical. Maya had swallowed, her tongue feeling thick in her mouth. I thought she looked out of place, she'd admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw her, she's older and she's using a cane. And I just assumed that she didn't belong there. That she didn't deserve to be in first class. There had been a long silence as the HR rep had jotted down her words. The look on their face hadn't been judgmental, but it had been disappointed. It wasn't the disappointment Maya had feared from her parents or her colleagues. It was something more profound, something that made her feel small and foolish. They had concluded the meeting, their words polite but distant. We'll be in touch, they had said before escorting her back to the front desk, and Maya had left with her heart heavy, her mind swirling with doubt. But it wasn't the formal proceedings that had shaken her the most. It was the unspoken tension between her and her fellow flight attendants, the cold way her usual camaraderie had vanished. When she arrived at the crew quarters on her next flight, Diego was there, leaning against the doorframe. He gave her a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with that all-too-knowing gaze. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, Maya found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I was just so frustrated and I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was following protocol. But now, I know I was wrong. Diego didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but firm. Maya, no one's perfect. But you've got to understand. What happened wasn't just about you being frustrated. It was about how you saw Claire. What you assumed about her, before you even asked her a single question. Maya swallowed, the sting of the truth burning in her chest again. I know. I realize that now. But it's too late. I can't undo what I did. Doesn't mean you can't change it though, Diego replied, his gaze steady. You've got to face this head-on. Not just for Claire, but for yourself. Maya nodded slowly, her throat tight. It wasn't the first time Diego had tried to help her, but this time his words cut deeper. He wasn't just telling her to apologize or to make amends. He was pushing her to look inward, to confront the things she had buried deep inside. The things she had never considered before. After a long silent pause, he patted her on the back and added, "Just don't make the same mistake twice, all right? You're better than this." For the first time since the incident, Maya felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. A glimmer of a path forward. The next few days felt like an endless loop of anticipation. Maya had learned to take deep breaths whenever the phone rang, unsure if the HR department was finally going to drop the hammer or if they were going to offer her another chance. It wasn't until a Thursday afternoon that the email arrived in her inbox. Asterisk meeting scheduled with senior management, 2 p.m. sharp. Please attend in full uniform. Asterisk. Her stomach churned as she clicked open the message, her mind racing with scenarios. They would either fire her outright or they would give her another chance, though she wasn't sure which was more terrifying. The meeting room was sterile, quiet, the walls lined with glass and chrome. Maya sat at the long conference table, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She was the last to arrive. The other senior staff members were already seated, including Captain Reed and 2 other flight managers she didn't recognize. Maya's breath caught when she saw Claire Winslow seated at the far end of the table, looking entirely composed despite the circumstances. She met Maya's gaze and gave a slight nod. No judgment, but a quiet understanding that was almost worse than any verbal reprimand. A long silence hung in the air as the executives exchanged looks, and then the room went still. Maya, Captain Reed began, his voice calm but firm. We've reviewed the details of the incident thoroughly, and we've come to a decision. You've shown remorse, and your honesty is noted. However, this is a serious matter, one that goes beyond a simple misunderstanding. Maya's heart beat loudly in her chest, her palms growing clammy. We're offering you a chance to stay with the company, but with conditions, Reed continued. You'll undergo extensive training in customer service, diversity and sensitivity. This will be monitored closely. If at any point we feel you're not progressing, you'll be let go. This is not a second chance to squander. Maya's breath caught. She wasn't sure if she was relieved or terrified. But it didn't matter. She had her second chance. The weight of it pressed down on her. But with it came the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just about avoiding termination. It was about proving she could change. Maya stood in front of her mirror that evening, staring at her reflection with a mix of uncertainty and determination. The soft lighting of her apartment did little to ease the harshness of the image she saw before her. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority and pride, now felt like a weight, a reminder of everything she had to prove to herself and the world. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders stiff, but there was a spark inside her that hadn't been there before. It was late, but Maya couldn't bring herself to sleep. Instead, she sat at her desk, scrolling through the emails that had piled up throughout the day. Among them, she noticed a new message from Claire Winslow. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The last time she'd interacted with Claire had been nothing short of humiliating. Yet here, Claire was reaching out to her, offering her something Maya hadn't expected, An olive branch. The email was simple, brief, and to the point. Dear Maya. I've been informed about the decision regarding your probation. I hope this will be the opportunity you need to grow and reflect. I trust you will take the time to truly learn from this experience. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need support. Regards, Claire Winslow. Maya blinked at the words, her mind racing. A part of her wanted to reply, to explain herself, to try and redeem herself in Claire's eyes. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, knew that no words could undo the damage done. What Maya needed now wasn't an apology. It was action. It was proving that she was capable of change. She let out a long breath and clicked open a new tab on her computer. She had training to prepare for, and it was time to dive in. The following Monday arrived with a sort of cold clarity that made everything feel painfully real. Maya's uniform felt tighter than usual as she made her way to the training center. The day was filled with lectures and seminars, each one more uncomfortable than the last. She had thought she understood diversity training, thought she had a grasp on what it meant to treat everyone fairly. But now, sitting in the sterile fluorescent-lit room with a dozen other flight attendants, all of them looking just as uncomfortable as she felt, she realized how much she had truly overlooked. The instructor, a woman named Jenna who had been with the airline for years, began with a simple yet chilling question. How many of you believe you've never judged a passenger based on their appearance? Maya's hand stayed firmly at her side, and the rest of the room followed suit. No one spoke. Jenna nodded, unsurprised. We all have. Whether it's their clothing, their age, their race, or even their demeanor, our minds make assumptions whether we want them to or not. But the key is what we do with those assumptions. Maya's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made assumptions. Too many. She had let her biases control her actions, her judgments, and her behavior. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern, a way of thinking she hadn't even known she was operating under. She had thought she was doing her job, following protocol, but now she understood that her actions had been rooted in something far deeper and more insidious. The session continued, and Maya found herself reflecting more and more on her past decisions. The small moments she had brushed aside as insignificant now stood out in stark relief. She had always prided herself on being the model employee, the one everyone could count on to keep things running smoothly. But that image of herself had been a mask, a way to avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth about her own limitations. It wasn't until later in the day that Maya truly began to feel the weight of what she was learning. Jenna had organized an exercise where the flight attendants were split into pairs and asked to role-play different scenarios involving passengers of all walks of life. Maya was partnered with Rosa, a quiet woman with short black hair and sharp eyes, who had been with the airline longer than Maya had been alive. The exercise was simple. They were to pretend one of them was a passenger who had been assigned the wrong seat, and the other was the flight attendant trying to resolve the issue. The goal was to act with empathy, to avoid making assumptions, and to approach the situation without bias. First, Maya thought it would be easy. After all, she had dealt with passengers hundreds of times before. But when it was her turn to play the passenger, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Rosa's eyes seemed to look right through her, assessing her with the precision of someone who had seen it all before. "What's the problem, ma'am?" Rosa asked, her voice professional but cool. Maya felt a surge of discomfort. She was the passenger now. She could see how easy it would be for a flight attendant to feel superior, to assume control without ever asking the right questions. The role play was supposed to be about empathy, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the judgment of her was hanging in the air. "What's the problem?" Rosa repeated, more forcefully this time. "You're in the wrong seat, ma'am. I need to ask you to move." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. The cold detachment in Rosa's voice, the unspoken authority behind the words. It reminded Maya of her own actions toward Claire. She had never asked questions. She had never tried to understand. She had assumed. I didn't realize," Maya stammered, the weight of her own guilt heavy in her chest. Rosa nodded, her expression softening. "It's okay. But this is what happens when we don't approach situations with an open mind, when we don't listen and make assumptions. It's not about the rules, Maya. It's about respect. Maya blinked back tears. It wasn't just about respect for passengers. It was about respect for herself, too. She had disrespected Claire in ways she hadn't even realized. And now she was beginning to understand the depth of that mistake. By the end of the day, Maya felt exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. The training had been draining, not because of the content, but because of the way it had forced her to confront every moment of failure, every action she had taken without thinking. As she made her way back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had only just begun the work of changing. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to require vulnerability, patience, and an acceptance that she had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt something like hope. She wasn't just doing this for her job anymore. She was doing this for herself. When she arrived home, she sat down at her desk once more, staring at the email from Claire. She hesitated for only a moment before typing out a simple response. Dear Claire. Thank you for your kindness. I am working hard to change and to learn from my mistakes. I hope one day I can prove to you and to myself that I am capable of better. Best Maya. She hit send and sat back in her chair, her fingers still trembling slightly. The journey was far from over, but it was a start. And for the first time she felt ready to take that first step. The sun had barely risen when Maya pulled herself out of bed on the first morning of her probation. The pale light filtering through her curtains felt colder than usual, as though the world itself were holding its breath, waiting to see if she would falter. She dressed slowly, methodically. White blouse, navy skirt, polished shoes. Each article a reminder of the uniform that both defined her identity and now marked her ongoing trial. At the airport, the hallway to the crew quarters felt longer, as if each step carried the weight of her past mistake. She passed colleagues who offered curt nods or polite smiles, but none dared to linger in conversation. Maya swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to keep walking until she reached her locker. Inside, a small folder awaited her. Her probation paperwork, training schedule, and a note from HR reminding her that today's flight would be a confidence-building run, with a senior attendant and Claire Winslow in attendance. Maya's heart lurched at the reminder. The thought of seeing Claire again so soon twisted her stomach into knots. She closed the locker and took a moment to center herself. This is part of the process, she repeated silently. Face the fear. Remember your purpose. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. Morning briefing. The briefing room buzzed with murmurs as the staff gathered. Captain Reed stood at the front. His face unreadable but his stature firm. Beside him stood Jenna, the sensitivity trainer, and Rosa, Maya's role-play partner from last week, now her mentor for the day. Maya, Captain Reed began, today's flight will be to Chicago. We've assigned Claire Winslow a seat in 2A. Rosa will be by your side throughout, and she'll offer guidance. This is your opportunity to put what you've learned into practice. Maya nodded, though her throat felt dry. Rosa offered her a small, encouraging smile. You've got this, Rosa whispered, then turned to the others. Let's run through the safety checks. As they went through the motions, emergency equipment, galley supplies, passenger manifests, Maya felt the tension slowly give way to professional focus. This was what she knew. The checklist, the procedure, the courtesy rounds. For a moment, she slipped into autopilot, her anxiety melting into familiarity. Boarding. First-class passengers filed aboard with polite greetings, many offering Maya nods or, "Good morning, ma'am." Maya returned each with a warm smile, determined to display the respect every traveler deserved. When she reached seat 2A, Claire stood waiting, cane in hand and handbag draped over her forearm. Claire's posture was calm, her face inscrutable as she scanned Maya with her clear, steady gaze. "Good morning, Mrs. Winslow," Maya said, her voice smooth but sincere. "Welcome aboard. May I help you with your bag?" Claire inclined her head. "Please," she replied. Maya knelt to lift the bag into the overhead compartment, mindful of her movements. gentle, respectful. She paused before closing the bin. Is there anything else I can do for you before takeoff? Claire's eyes softened. No, thank you. I appreciate your courtesy. Something like relief washed over Maya. Claire's simple, gracious response felt like small redemption, but Maya knew it was only the beginning. Mid-flight challenge. An hour later, as the final service trays were cleared, Maya noticed a disturbance in the cabin. A passenger in 1C was arguing quietly into a phone, complaining about the wrong wine selection. The tone was rising, and the attendant on duty was hesitating. Maya's heart thudded. This was her chance, not to assert authority, but to demonstrate empathy and leadership. She exchanged a quick glance with Rosa, who gave a subtle nod. Excuse me, Maya said as she approached. I'm Maya Dawson, senior on this flight. How can I help resolve this? The passenger, an impeccably dressed man in his 50s, scowled. I ordered the 2017 Chateau Margaux, but you brought me a generic table wine. Do you think this is acceptable? Maya maintained eye contact, her voice calm. I'm very sorry for the mistake. Let me take care of it immediately. I'll bring you the correct wine within minutes, and I'd like to offer you a selection of chocolates on the house for the inconvenience. Will that be all right? The man's expression softened slightly. Yes, that would be acceptable. Maya returned to the galley, coordinating with the catering team to secure the requested bottle. She couldn't help but think back to her own mistake, how she had allowed frustration to override courtesy. Now, she let courtesy guide her every action. When she reappeared with the proper wine and chocolates, the man offered a nod of gratitude. Thank you, Ms. Dawson. I appreciate your prompt attention. Reflections at cruising altitude. After serving the rest of first class, Maya slipped into an empty jump seat near the door and closed her eyes for a moment. Rosa joined her quietly. Nice work, Rosa said softly. You handled that perfectly. Maya exhaled. Thank you. It felt good, but I keep wondering if it's enough. Rosa shook her head. It's more than enough for today. Growth isn't a single act. It's what you do every day. You showed empathy, accountability, and leadership. Those are the skills you need. Maya considered this. I hope I remember this feeling, she admitted. You will, Rosa assured her. And tomorrow you'll do it again, maybe in a different way. That's how you prove you've changed. Evening debrief. The flight landed smoothly, and after assisting with disembarkation, Maya found herself back in the crew quarters for the evening debrief. Captain Reed, Jenna, and the HR liaison were present, as well as Claire Winslow, who had kindly agreed to participate in a brief feedback session. Captain Reed began. Maya, we observed your service today, particularly your handling of the in-flight wine incident. You demonstrated the empathy and professionalism we expect. Claire, if you'd like to share your thoughts. Claire rose and addressed Maya directly, her voice both warm and measured. Ms. Dawson, thank you for your assistance today. You were attentive, respectful, and prompt. It's clear you've taken our training to heart. I appreciate the effort you made. Maya felt a lump in her throat. Thank you, Mrs. Winslow. Your feedback means a great deal to me. Claire offered a genuine smile. I look forward to seeing your continued growth. I know you can do it. As Claire returned to her seat, Maya realized how much this moment meant. It wasn't just praise. It was a sign of trust earned, however small. Home again. Later that night, Maya returned home utterly exhausted yet strangely buoyed. She poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window, watching the airport lights glitter like distant stars. The day's events replayed in her mind. Claire's composed presence, the nod of the wine passenger, Rosa's quiet encouragement. She opened her journal, a habit she'd begun for self-reflection, and wrote, Today I was afraid. I feared meeting Claire again, feared exposing my weakness. Instead, I found the strength to serve with humility and respect. I practiced empathy in the face of conflict and earned a moment of genuine approval. This is how change starts. In small actions repeated. Tomorrow I will wake up and do it again. Asterisk. Maya closed the journal and let her head rest against the glass. Growth, she understood now, would be neither quick nor easy. But tonight she had taken the hardest step, turning her regret into resolve. And that was enough to carry her forward into whatever challenges awaited at dawn. The morning light streamed in through the blinds as Maya stirred from her sleep. Her body ached from the previous day's efforts, physically, mentally, emotionally, but something deeper inside her felt different. She was starting to feel a sense of clarity, like she could finally breathe again, unburdened by the constant weight of her past mistakes. The probationary period still loomed over her, of course, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable wall. Instead, it felt like a challenge, one she might just be able to meet. She pushed herself out of bed, pulling on the familiar uniform, tailored skirt, white blouse, and navy blazer. She took a long look at herself in the mirror, her reflection meeting her gaze. This wasn't about perfection. It was about the effort she was willing to put in. One step at a time, she reminded herself. As she prepared for the day, Maya realized that she wasn't merely getting dressed for work anymore. She was gearing up to prove to herself that she could be different, that she could change. She hadn't just received another chance. She had to earn it every single day. The morning flight. The morning briefing was different today. It wasn't just the usual checklist and roles being assigned. Captain Reed had called an impromptu meeting to discuss the next phase of Maya's probation, and for the first time, it wasn't all about her mistakes. It was about her growth, what she had learned and how she could apply it moving forward. Maya, Captain Reed began, glancing at the crew gathered around the table. Today's flight will be to New York. It's a high-profile route, plenty of regular passengers. I'll be watching how you handle the interactions, especially with the more demanding customers. Rosa will be your shadow for this one. Maya nodded, determined to rise to the occasion. But the moment he said demanding, her stomach flipped. She had no issue with the regulars or the polite travelers. But the demanding ones, the ones who expected perfection, those were the true tests of her ability to stay grounded. Her heart began to race, but she quickly pushed the anxiety aside. Asterisk focus. You've handled this before. You can handle it again. Asterisk. New York bound. Once aboard, the flight quickly picked up pace. Maya moved through the cabin, exchanging brief pleasantries with passengers, all the while keeping an eye on the clock and checking the status of any potential issues. But today was different. There was no avoiding the passengers who were, for lack of a better word, difficult. By the time they reached the midway point of the flight, the first signs of trouble appeared. A woman in first class had a small child who had begun to cry uncontrollably. The child's sobs echoed through the cabin, escalating the tension in the space. The mother, frazzled and embarrassed, shot Maya a desperate look as if blaming her for the scene unfolding. Maya approached with a practiced calm. She knelt beside the woman and her child, offering a soft smile. "Would you like a blanket to help soothe your little one?" she asked gently. The mother nodded quickly, clearly appreciative of the gesture. She returned to the galley and instructed Rosa to prepare a cup of warm milk while she retrieved the blanket. She was keenly aware of the passengers watching, some glancing over with disapproval as the child continued to cry. It was in moments like this that the old Maya would have felt a pang of frustration, resentment at being put in such an uncomfortable position. But today she felt something different, compassion. Returning to the family, Maya offered the blanket and the milk. "I know it's tough. If there's anything I can do to make this more comfortable for you, just let me know," she said. Her voice remained gentle, soothing. The mother's face softened, her previously tight expression loosening as she accepted the warmth Maya offered, both literally and figuratively. The child quieted down, and by the time the flight had settled back into a rhythm, the tension in the cabin had eased. Rosa, watching from the galley, gave her a small nod of approval. Maya's heart swelled. This wasn't about pleasing every passenger. It was about showing the kind of care that made a difference, no matter how small. Midway through the flight, the next test came a little later. A passenger in 4B, a businessman with an air of impatience about him, demanded that his meal be exchanged for something else, despite having selected his meal just moments before takeoff. "Excuse me," the man snapped when Maya arrived to offer him his meal. "This is not what I ordered. I asked for the vegetarian option, not this meatloaf. Get it right next time." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of frustration rise in her chest. She had no tolerance for rudeness, especially when she had been so careful to double-check the orders. But today she wasn't going to react. Not yet. Not with this man. "I'm sorry for the mix-up, sir," she said calmly. "I'll take care of it right away." She returned to the galley, giving herself a brief moment to center herself. She didn't need to react immediately to every provocation. Instead, she gathered a few options and returned to the passenger, offering him a different meal along with a genuine, "Thank you for your patience." The businessman stared at her, caught off guard by her calm demeanor. After a tense beat, he muttered something that might have been an apology, though he didn't look at her directly. Maya simply nodded and walked away. She didn't need his validation. She had passed the test and that was enough. The feedback session. By the time the flight had ended, Maya was exhausted. It had been a day of small victories, each one gradually eroding the walls of self-doubt she had built around herself. She felt something new inside her, a quiet, persistent sense of accomplishment that didn't rely on the approval of others. As she gathered with the crew for the debriefing, Rosa caught her eye. She smiled softly, her gaze filled with quiet pride. It was the first time that day that Maya realized she had done well, truly well. She hadn't been perfect, but she had been human, and she had handled the challenges with grace. Captain Reed addressed the group, offering a summary of the flight. "I'd like to commend Maya for her professionalism and poise today. She handled the difficult passengers with a level of calm that I've rarely seen. Your growth is evident, Maya." Maya's heart fluttered at the recognition, but she quickly tempered it with humility. It wasn't praise that she was after. It was the inner peace that came with knowing she had done her best. After the meeting, Claire approached her. Maya straightened immediately, uncertain of what Claire might say. "Ms. Dawson," Claire began, her voice steady but warm, "I'm impressed by how you handled today's challenges. It's clear that you've been doing the hard work." Maya could only nod, her throat tight. "Thank you, Mrs. Winslow. I'm doing my best." Claire smiled, her expression softened by something almost paternal. "That's all any of us can do. Keep going." Reflection. Later that evening, back at home, Maya once again sat by the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but it wasn't the city she was thinking about. It was her journey. She opened her journal and wrote, "Today, I faced two very different passengers. One was kind and gracious. The other was rude and demanding. But both were opportunities. Opportunities to show empathy, professionalism, and calm. I didn't get everything right, but I handled what I could. And that's enough for now. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to keep learning." Maya closed the journal and let out a long breath. Tomorrow was another day. Another chance to prove to herself that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. And for the first time in months, she felt that she could finally take ownership of the journey ahead, one step at a time. The next few days were a blur of activity and reflection. Maya's focus remained on the tasks at hand. Each passenger interaction, each training session, each feedback meeting. She approached them all with a quiet intensity. It wasn't just about keeping her job anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could be someone different, someone better. The first few days of training were grueling. Maya found herself facing intense leadership development seminars, anti-bias courses that dug deep into her beliefs and values, and difficult conversations with her colleagues. At first, she resented the endless hours of lectures and role-playing exercises. It all felt so artificial, so disconnected from the fast-paced, high-stakes reality of her job. But slowly, she began to notice something changing inside her. She had always prided herself on her quick decisions, her ability to keep control of chaotic situations. But as the training unfolded, she realized that true leadership wasn't just about controlling the situation. It was about understanding others, offering support, and leading with empathy. She remembered the incident with the child on the flight to New York. That moment had felt so small at the time, but it had meant more to the mother than Maya had realized. It was a turning point for her, a moment where she had finally seen beyond the surface. That realization carried her through the long hours of training, even when her patience was tested. The first test. A difficult passengers group. It was on the 4th day of her probation that Maya's resolve was truly tested. The crew had been assigned to a high-demand route to Los Angeles, a flight with a history of difficult passengers. And as expected, the moment the flight reached cruising altitude, the tension started to build. It began with a group of 4 business travelers in the middle of the cabin. They were loud, arguing about work matters, and completely ignoring the flight attendants as they moved through the aisles. Maya, trying to maintain her composure, gave them a polite warning about their volume. The men simply shrugged her off, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Normally, Maya would have become defensive, perhaps even frustrated by their blatant disregard for her authority. But today she stopped herself. She paused, taking a deep breath and reminding herself that this wasn't about proving who was in charge. It was about handling the situation with grace. Instead of escalating things, Maya approached them again, this time with a calm, measured tone. She offered to bring them drinks, hoping the act of service would break the tension. One of the men waved her off, but another looked up with a raised eyebrow. "Can I help you, sir?" Maya asked, her voice steady. The man smirked. "I just don't get why you're bothering us. Can't you see we're busy?" Maya's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had faced far worse than this. "I understand you're busy," she said, her tone soft but firm. "But I'm here to make sure you're as comfortable as possible. If there's anything I can do to assist, please let me know." It was a moment of quiet power, an unspoken acknowledgement that Maya wasn't backing down, but also that she wasn't going to fight. She wouldn't engage in their hostility. The man who had spoken finally gave her a long, appraising look. "Fine. Get me a glass of scotch," he muttered. Maya nodded and turned to walk away. She didn't win him over with force. She had won him over with respect. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward, and that felt like enough. After the flight. Back in the crew room after the flight, Maya was exhausted. The day had been filled with subtle victories and challenges, each one pushing her out of her comfort zone and forcing her to rethink her approach to people and leadership. She had learned that sometimes, the smallest gesture could make the most impact. As she walked to her locker to retrieve her things, she spotted Rosa, who was leaning against the wall, watching her closely. Rosa had always been Maya's quiet ally, someone who had seen her through the earlier days of tension, judgment, and failure. But today, there was something different in her gaze. Respect, perhaps even admiration. "You handled that group pretty well," Rosa said quietly, her voice soft but sincere. Maya smiled, though it was tired. "I don't know. It didn't feel like much. They were still rude, and they didn't apologize." "But you didn't let it get to you," Rosa replied, her eyes steady. "That's the difference. You didn't fight them. You didn't try to be right. You just stayed calm. And that's the real strength." Maya considered her words for a moment. For years, she had believed that strength was about standing her ground, about making her voice heard no matter what. But now, it seemed that true strength wasn't always about confrontation. It was about restraint, patience, and compassion. "I still have a long way to go," Maya admitted, closing her locker and slinging her bag over her shoulder. "But I'm trying." "I can see it," Rosa said with a smile. "Keep going. You're doing better than you think." Maya left the crew room with a strange sense of accomplishment. She wasn't perfect. She hadn't won every battle today. But she had done better than she had the day before. And that, for now, was enough. The training challenges. The days following her first real test on the flight passed in a haze of training sessions, briefings, and more passenger interactions. Maya's progress was slow but steady. There were still days when she felt the familiar pangs of self-doubt, when she questioned if she would ever be able to truly change. But the more she reflected on her actions, the more she saw evidence of growth. One particularly difficult day, she was tasked with completing a leadership exercise in which she had to step into the role of a team leader and guide a group through a stressful situation. The group was skeptical of her leadership abilities, unsure if she could handle the pressure. Maya had to navigate through their doubt, using every bit of patience and empathy she had learned so far. By the end of the exercise, they had completed the task successfully, and Maya had earned their trust, at least for the moment. Afterward, during a one-on-one meeting with Captain Reed, Maya felt a growing sense of self-assurance. The captain had always been a tough but fair mentor, and today, he looked at her with a new expression. "You've made significant progress, Maya," he said, his voice unusually warm. "I've seen it in the way you handle yourself now. You've got a long road ahead of you, but I think you're finally starting to get it." Maya smiled, the words a balm to her weary soul. "Thank you, Captain. I'll keep working on it." And for the first time, she didn't feel the pressure of the upcoming 6-month deadline looming over her. She felt something better, hope. Hope that perhaps the changes she had made could stick. Hope that she could continue to evolve one step at a time. A glimpse of the future. The days turned into weeks, and Maya's probationary period continued. Each day, each flight, each training session, she grew just a little bit more confident in herself. The mistakes were still there, of course, they always would be. But she had started to trust herself, to know that she was capable of change. And when the day came for her final evaluation, Maya was ready. She knew that the outcome wasn't guaranteed, but she also knew that she had put in the work. She had faced her flaws, addressed her biases, and learned to lead with empathy. She would face whatever came next with the same resolve she had cultivated along the way. It wasn't just about keeping her job anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could be a different person than the one who had walked through the airport doors months ago. The final test awaited, but Maya was ready to meet it. The day Maya had been preparing for had finally arrived. The culmination of months of self-reflection, grueling training, and countless moments of doubt were about to be tested. The final evaluation had been scheduled, and she stood at the edge of the unknown. The stakes were higher than ever, but for the first time in months, she wasn't consumed by fear. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar, hope. Real hope that she had changed, that she had the capacity to continue growing, to prove to herself, and to the people who had believed in her, that she was worthy of the second chance she had been given. It was early morning when Maya arrived at the airport, the familiar hum of activity surrounding her. The buzz of passengers, the sound of rolling luggage, the voices of flight attendants as they prepared for another day. She took a deep breath, inhaling the energy of the terminal. Today felt different. Today felt like a new chapter in her life, not just another day to get through. She arrived at the conference room where the final evaluation would take place. The room was stark, with a long, polished table and a row of chairs set up for the panel of executives and senior staff who would be watching her every move. Maya took a seat, trying to control the rapid beat of her heart. She could hear her own breath as she sat in the silence, hands folded neatly in front of her. The door opened, and James Whitmore walked in first, followed by Meredith Winslow and a few others. Maya stood, her posture straight but relaxed, trying to appear composed. James gave her a slight nod as he took a seat, his eyes sharp and focused. Meredith, as always, was calm and composed, her presence radiating quiet authority. She gave Maya a measured look, but there was something more in her eyes this time, a subtle recognition that Maya had come far. "Good morning, Maya," James began, his voice businesslike. "We're here to review your performance over the past several months. I trust you understand the gravity of this moment." Maya nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, sir. We've all seen the progress you've made," James continued. "But this isn't just about meeting expectations. It's about whether or not you've truly internalized the lessons from your training and whether you've learned to lead with empathy and integrity." Maya felt a weight settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about doing well on a test. This was about proving that she had changed, that she had become someone different from the person who had walked into this airport months ago. The old Maya would have focused on getting it right, on impressing the panel, on securing her place. But now she knew that it was more than that. It was about showing them, showing herself, that she had transformed into someone who was capable of leading with genuine care for others. James continued, "Your evaluation will be based on a series of scenarios. We've arranged for you to respond to live situations, some of which will be more challenging than others. Your ability to handle conflict, lead with clarity, and demonstrate empathy will all be evaluated. Are you ready?" Maya's stomach tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." James looked toward the other panelists, who all gave him a nod of agreement. "We'll begin shortly," he said before stepping out of the room to prepare. Maya sat in silence, her hands now trembling slightly. She knew she had done her best, but part of her feared that the judgment of others could undo all the progress she had made. What if it wasn't enough? What if they saw through the surface and found that, deep down, she wasn't truly changed? Meredith's voice cut through her thoughts. "Maya," she said softly, her gaze steady. "Do not let fear dictate this moment. You have prepared for this. You know what it means to lead with empathy now. Show them who you've become, not who you were." Maya met Meredith's gaze and nodded. The words resonated deeply. This wasn't just about proving something to the panel. It was about proving something to herself. The first scenario. A fractured family. The first scenario was presented by Captain Reed, who was sitting in the corner of the room, observing closely. The panel's eyes were fixed on Maya as he began the simulation. "Maya," Captain Reed said, "imagine you're dealing with a family that's been seated separately on a crowded flight. The parents are upset because they can't sit together, and their children are stressed out, causing a scene. They're demanding that you resolve the issue immediately. How do you handle it?" Maya inhaled, drawing on the techniques she had learned in training. She didn't rush in with a solution. Instead, she focused on understanding the underlying issue. "First, I would approach them calmly," she said, her voice steady. "I'd acknowledge their frustration and reassure them that I'm here to help. Then, I'd listen to their concerns and assess the situation. I'd offer alternative seating options, if available, or offer to speak with the gate agents to find a solution." She paused, looking at the panel. "I would also take a moment to acknowledge the children and try to distract them with a small gesture, like offering them a snack or a toy to calm them down." The panel listened intently, and for a moment there was silence. Then James spoke. "And what if there's no immediate solution available, and the passengers continue to escalate their behavior? How do you keep the situation from spiraling out of control?" Maya's mind raced as she processed the scenario. She could feel the pressure mounting. But she had learned from her experiences, and she knew what to do. "If there's no immediate solution, I'd stay calm and composed. I'd keep the conversation focused on finding a resolution, not on the emotions involved. I'd continue to offer alternatives, and if necessary, I'd involve the appropriate team members to help manage the situation. But the key is to remain empathetic and maintain control of the situation without escalating it." James nodded, and the others seemed satisfied with her response. "That's a good approach," he said. "Empathy, while maintaining authority, is key in these situations." The second scenario. An impromptu leadership test. The next scenario was a little more personal. Maya was presented with a situation where one of her colleagues was struggling. Sarah, a junior flight attendant, was visibly overwhelmed, her nerves getting the best of her as passengers continued to demand her attention. Maya was asked to step in and guide Sarah through the situation. "Imagine Sarah is having difficulty keeping control of the cabin," James prompted. "What do you do?" Maya felt a sense of responsibility as she rose from her seat. This wasn't just about handling passengers anymore. This was about leading her peers, offering support, and creating an environment where everyone could thrive. She approached Sarah with a calm and reassuring tone. Sarah, it's okay, Maya said gently. You've got this. I'm here to help, and we're going to handle this together. Maya didn't take over the situation. Instead, she guided Sarah, helping her prioritize tasks and keep her composure. She offered small but impactful pieces of advice, like how to break down the workload into manageable steps and how to engage with the passengers with empathy and professionalism. By the time the scenario concluded, Maya had shown the panel that leadership wasn't about dominating others. It was about lifting them up, especially in moments of vulnerability. The evaluation conclusion. As the final scenario came to an end, Maya felt a mix of relief and anticipation. She had navigated each situation with calm, patience, and empathy. She had not only survived but thrived in these simulated challenges. And, as the last questions were asked and the panel members exchanged their thoughts, Maya realized that it wasn't just about the outcome of this evaluation. It was about the journey she had taken to get here. James Whitmore stood, signaling the end of the evaluation. Maya, we're impressed. You've shown that you've taken the lessons to heart and that you are ready for the challenges ahead. We believe in your potential. Maya's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and pride. She hadn't just passed the test, she had transformed herself. The woman who had walked into the training room months ago was not the same woman who stood before them now. She had faced her flaws, her biases, her fears, and she had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more capable than ever. And as the room emptied and Maya stood alone in the quiet space, she realized that this was only the beginning. There would always be more challenges, more opportunities to grow. But for the first time, Maya knew that she was ready. Ready to lead. Ready to grow. Ready for the future. Maya's heart was still racing from the evaluation as she walked out of the conference room. The weight of the panel's praise lingered in the air, but it wasn't enough to quell the swirling thoughts in her mind. She had done it. She had passed. But the sense of accomplishment wasn't overwhelming. Instead, it was tempered by the realization that this was just the beginning. The true test of her transformation would come not from a series of simulations or training sessions but from the real world, the challenges that awaited her on the floor, in the terminal, and among the people she served every day. She stepped into the bustling terminal, the constant hum of activity surrounding her. The bright fluorescent lights and the fast-paced movement of passengers rushing to their gates felt almost surreal after the quiet tension of the evaluation. For a moment, Maya paused and took it all in. She didn't feel like the same person who had entered this airport months ago, filled with uncertainty, self-doubt, and a desperate need to prove herself. Now there was a quiet strength in her. Though still fragile, it was undeniably real. As she walked toward the staff room, her mind began to drift to the next step. What would her first day back on the floor look like? How would the people around her react to the changes she had made? Would they notice the difference? Would they believe that she had truly transformed? Maya knew she couldn't expect everything to be smooth sailing, but she also knew that she had to take the first step, regardless of how uncertain or daunting it seemed. The door to the staff room opened, and Maya walked in, meeting the eyes of her colleagues. There was a sense of quiet tension in the air. It was as though everyone was waiting for something, for her to acknowledge the change, for her to show them that she was different. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing, scrutinizing. Sarah, the young flight attendant she had helped during her evaluation, smiled at her from across the room. Her expression was warm, but Maya could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Hey Maya," she said softly. "You did great in there. You really helped me out during the simulation." Maya smiled back, grateful for the compliment. "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that." But Sarah wasn't the only one watching her. James Whitmore had sent a message earlier that morning, informing her that she would be assigned to a flight that afternoon as part of her transition back into her full role. There was no turning back now. Maya had made the commitment to change, and she knew that the next few days would be crucial in proving her growth. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and turned to her colleagues. "I know I've made mistakes," she began, her voice clear but sincere. "And I've spent a lot of time reflecting on them. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I've learned a lot and I'm going to keep learning. I'm here to support all of you, just as I hope you'll support me as I work to be better." The room fell silent for a moment. Then, slowly, one of the senior flight attendants, Grace, spoke up. "We've all seen the changes in you, Maya. You've been doing the work and it shows. We're here for you." Maya's chest tightened at Grace's words. It was an acknowledgement that she hadn't expected, but it meant more than anything. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that she had shown up, that she had confronted her flaws head-on, and that she was willing to continue evolving. With the reassurance of her colleagues, Maya felt the last remnants of her anxiety fade. She had taken the first step. Now it was time to prove that she was truly ready. The flight, a test in action. Maya's first assignment back on the floor came sooner than she expected. She was assigned to a cross-country flight, one of the busiest routes of the day. The anticipation of the task ahead sent a jolt of nervous energy through her. But this time she knew how to manage it. She wasn't going to let the pressure consume her. The key was in the details, in the way she engaged with her crew and the passengers. The small, consistent actions were what would prove her growth. As she walked toward the gate, Maya's mind flashed back to the months of training she had undergone. The anti-bias workshops, the leadership development sessions, every conversation she had had with Meredith, every challenge that had pushed her to the brink of her patience and self-assurance. It had all led to this moment. And though she couldn't predict what would happen, she was determined to handle it with integrity. The flight was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes, and Maya found herself facing the usual pre-flight chaos. Passengers were rushing to board, the crew was finalizing preparations, and there was a sense of urgency in the air. Maya stepped into the midst of it, taking charge with calm authority. Her movements were purposeful, efficient, and confident, traits she had worked hard to cultivate. One of the passengers, a middle-aged man, approached the gate, visibly frustrated. His tone was sharp as he demanded a better seat, his voice rising above the noise of the terminal. Maya recognized the familiar tension, the sense of entitlement that she had once let slide, too unsure of herself to challenge it. But this time things were different. She walked toward him, maintaining eye contact. "Good afternoon, sir," she said in a calm, even tone. "How can I assist you today?" The man huffed, his impatience palpable. "I'm supposed to have a better seat. This is unacceptable." Maya took a deep breath, remaining composed. "I understand your frustration, and I'm here to help resolve this. Let's take a look at your seating options and see what we can do." She didn't allow herself to get defensive, didn't allow the man's anger to dictate her response. Instead, she focused on finding a solution. She was patient, professional, and empathetic. Maya was reminded that leadership wasn't about wielding power over others. It was about maintaining composure, finding solutions, and guiding others with respect. The man's demeanor softened as she spoke to him with clarity and care. Within minutes, they had found a resolution that suited both parties, and he had calmed down. As the passengers filed onto the plane and the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, Maya found herself reflecting on the exchange. This was the test she had been waiting for, the real-world application of everything she had learned. It wasn't about the big moments. It was about the small, everyday decisions. It was about how she showed up in those moments, how she treated people, and how she handled the pressure. Maya took a deep breath as she walked toward her station. The flight attendants exchanged looks, and though no one said anything aloud, Maya could feel the shift. They were watching her, waiting to see if she would revert to her old habits. But Maya knew now that she was different, and that was enough. A moment of reflection. As the plane cruised high above the clouds, Maya found a quiet moment in the galley. She stood by the small window, watching the sky unfold beneath her. The calm of the atmosphere mirrored the stillness within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with herself. She wasn't perfect. She still had room to grow. But for the first time she was truly committed to that growth. And that commitment was worth more than any position or recognition she could achieve. It was the journey that mattered, the constant process of becoming, of evolving, of striving to be better. The flight continued, and Maya stepped back into action, confident that, no matter what came next, she was ready to face it with integrity, empathy, and a renewed sense of purpose. As the plane touched down and the passengers began to disembark, Maya couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning of the rest of her life. A life where every day was an opportunity to grow, to lead, and to make a difference. She was ready for whatever came next. By the time Maya reached the midpoint of her probationary period, the patterns of her old life had begun to unravel completely. The uniform no longer felt like a prison but a mantle of responsibility. What once had been rote, the safety demos, the service rounds, the drills, now carried new weight. Each interaction was an opportunity to affirm her commitment to change, to live the lessons she had fought so hard to learn. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks before her probation review, that Maya encountered her greatest test yet. ########, a tense boarding gate. The terminal was unusually warm for early spring. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the polished tiles to mirrored glass. Maya stood at gate 14, watching the passengers queue in single file for the 5:20 flight to Denver. Today she had been assigned to lead the gate team, a testament to her progress. Standing alongside her were Rosa and a junior attendant, Lucas, whose cheerful attempts at conversation Maya could barely hear over the hum of the jetway. As Maya scanned boarding passes, she caught snippets of everyday frustrations, whispered complaints about carry-on size, grimaces at seat assignments, and an undercurrent of impatience that only grew as boarding slowed. Into this swirl strode a man in a crisp suit, late to the gate, who flung himself to the front of the line. Lucas, young and eager to please, stepped forward. "Sir, please take your place in line." The man huffed, disdain dancing in his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" he barked. "I have connections. I could make your life very difficult." Lucas's face paled. But before Maya could intervene, another voice cut through the crowd. "I'll take care of this," Maya said firmly, laying a hand on his shoulder. The man blanched as she rose on her toes, making her voice clear and calm. "I understand you're in a hurry, sir, but our policy requires that we board by group and seat number. I'll personally ensure you're on the next shuttle if we miss your connection." The man's bravado faltered under her composure. He stepped back and joined the queue, muttering a disgruntled apology. Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Rosa gave her a small, impressed nod. Lucas looked at her with awe. Maya smiled tightly, then moved on to the next passenger, her heart pounding, not with fear of retribution, but with the knowledge that she had chosen empathy over intimidation. #######, a misplaced remark. Later, as Maya handed out boarding cards to the last group, she overheard a hushed conversation between 2 senior flight attendants stationed at the jet bridge. Their voices were low, but the words cut through Maya like shards of glass. "Can you believe the new trainee got promoted to gate lead? She's lucky they didn't find out what she really is." "What do you mean?" "She's, too emotional. Always fussing over small passengers and their feelings. Doesn't have the backbone for the job." Maya's foot stilled. The word emotional struck at the heart of what she had struggled with most. Her own vulnerability. She recognized the phrase, a toxic dismissal, suggesting that compassion equaled weakness. Anger and hurt flooded her at once. Maya stepped forward, her uniform jacket brushing against the polished metal of the jet bridge. "Excuse me," she said loudly, turning to face them. "What do you mean by that remark?" The 2 attendants froze. One, a woman named Carla, reddened. We were just talking." Maya's voice remained controlled. "I'd appreciate it if we kept disparaging remarks about colleagues, especially those based on their character, in private." Her tone was firm but not angry. "We're a team. We look out for each other. We don't insult each other in front of passengers." The second attendant, Greg, mumbled something about misunderstood. Maya refused to back down. "Words matter," she said. We serve passengers from all backgrounds, and we earn their trust through respect. How we treat each other sets the example. With that, she turned away and continued boarding, her heart still racing but her spine unbent. Rosa appeared beside her again, placing a hand on her arm. "Thank you," Rosa whispered. "You did the right thing." Maya nodded, absorbing both the relief and the sting of confrontation. She realized that change wasn't just about how she treated passengers, it was about holding her colleagues to the same standard. She had once avoided such conflicts, fearful of rocking the boat. Now, she embraced the awkwardness as necessary. #community outreach. That evening, Maya arrived at a local community center for a mentorship event hosted by the Horizon Gives Foundation, a non-profit initiative partially funded by Claire Winslow's philanthropic efforts. Maya had volunteered months earlier, listing it as a required exercise for her leadership training. But now, as she stepped into the bright multipurpose room, she felt something deeper, a genuine connection to the community. Children crowded around tables, painting airplanes and building cardboard models, while parents chatted in small clusters. Maya's nerves fluttered. She had always seen her role as confined to the cabin or gate. This was new territory, direct personal impact. A woman from the center greeted her. "Maya Dawson, thank you for coming. The kids are excited to meet a real flight attendant." Maya smiled, kneeling to greet a small boy with paint-spattered hands. "Hi, I'm Maya. Ready to build something amazing today." The boy grinned. "Yes, we're making Captain Cool's supersonic flyer." Maya guided him and several other children through the project, teaching them about safety checks, encouraging creativity, and listening to their dreams of far-off destinations. She found herself laughing, genuinely engaged, reminding herself that her job wasn't just a set of protocols, it was about inspiring others. At the end of the evening, parents approached her, thanking her for her patience and kindness. One mother said, "You've got a gift for making people comfortable, even the shyest kids." Another father remarked, "We need more people like you in the world." Walking to her car, Maya felt the warmth of community acceptance wash over her. This was proof that her transformation wasn't just superficial. She was living her values, both in the air and on the ground. #######A quiet promise. That night, Maya lingered at her kitchen table, her journal open. She wrote, "Today I stood up for myself and my colleagues. I confronted disparaging remarks and demanded respect. Later I shared my passion with a room full of children, finding purpose beyond the uniform. Change isn't easy, it means standing alone sometimes, making others uncomfortable. But every step matters." She closed her journal and looked at her reflection in the window. The airport's lights danced in the glass, a reminder of her world miles away. She whispered softly, "I will keep doing this, no matter what." Maya knew the rest of her probationary period would bring further challenges, some in the skies, others on the ground. But as she turned off the kitchen light and prepared for bed, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer the fearful, biased flight attendant who had once lost control. She was Maya Dawson, leader, mentor, and lifelong learner. And her journey of transformation was only just beginning. The days following Maya's encounter at the mentorship event felt like they moved at a different pace. Every shift seemed heavier than the last, but in a way that felt purposeful. She'd come to understand that growth wasn't linear. It was a series of small, sometimes painful adjustments. Each day she encountered challenges that pushed her to test her limits, but also to confront the parts of herself she had long avoided. And every day, she was reminded that change wasn't just a personal journey. It was something that affected everyone around her. As her review date approached, Maya found herself thinking more about her future with Horizon. The fear that once hung over her, of losing her job, of failing, had begun to dissipate, replaced by a more pressing concern. Would she be able to truly change? Would she be able to make this new version of herself permanent? Or was this just a fleeting moment of growth? An unexpected challenge. One of the most difficult parts of Maya's journey so far had been her relationship with her colleague, Kara. They had worked together for years, and while they had always gotten along in a superficial way, there had always been an underlying tension between them. Kara, with her polished exterior and unshakable confidence, seemed to embody everything Maya once aspired to be. But under the surface, Maya had often felt dismissed by her, a feeling that had only deepened when Kara had assumed the role of mentor during her early years at Horizon. For weeks now, Maya had tried to build bridges, to demonstrate her growth and show Kara that she was more than just her mistakes. But every attempt seemed to fall flat. Kara's attitude toward Maya had always been professional but distant. Until now, she hadn't made any significant efforts to acknowledge the changes Maya was working so hard to implement. That is, until this afternoon. The confrontation. It was a quiet shift when Maya found herself standing at the gate with Kara, preparing to board the early flight to Los Angeles. The terminal had a relaxed energy, with fewer passengers than usual, and the hum of routine filled the air. Maya was organizing her things when Kara walked up to her, holding a stack of boarding passes. She didn't say anything at first, but Maya could feel her presence, the tension between them palpable. "Hey Maya," Kara finally said, her voice steady but not unfriendly. "Can we talk for a second?" Maya hesitated, looking up from her clipboard. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if this would be another one of Kara's polite but distant conversations, or if it would be something more. "Sure, what's up?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Kara paused for a moment, her gaze shifting around the terminal as if looking for something. Finally, she turned back to Maya, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk about the other day," Kara said slowly. "When you stood up to the passengers at Gate 14. I'll admit I was impressed." Maya's stomach tightened, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "Thanks. No," Kara interrupted, shaking her head. "I mean, I was impressed because I've seen you grow. We've worked together long enough for me to notice. I know you're not the same person you were a few months ago. I've seen the changes. And to be honest, it's kind of hard to watch sometimes." Maya blinked, surprised. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she let Kara continue. "It's hard because you're doing everything I've always wanted to do. You're leading in a way that feels real, not like I'm just pretending to be in charge but like you actually care. I don't know if I could do what you're doing. I've never had to confront myself like that. It's easier to just keep going, you know? Do my job, get the praise, but not dig any deeper." Maya felt the weight of Kara's words settle around her, the vulnerability in her confession more striking than anything she had expected. She hadn't realized how much she had underestimated Kara. She thought of their previous encounters, the moments when Kara had seemed so self-assured, and Maya had felt so small in comparison. Now, hearing her admit this, it was humbling. "I didn't realize," Maya said quietly. "I thought I was just the one who needed to change." Kara looked at her then, her eyes meeting Maya's with an intensity that made Maya feel seen in a way she hadn't before. "We all need to change," she said, her voice softer. "But not everyone is brave enough to face it. You are. That's why. I wanted to say I'm proud of you. I didn't always show it, but I've seen the work you're putting in." The words hit Maya harder than she expected. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself to others, trying to earn their respect. But in that moment, she realized that she had already done something even more significant. She had earned her own respect. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a true sense of belonging. "I'm still figuring it out," Maya admitted, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know if I'll ever be fully there, but I'm trying." Kara smiled back, her usual composure cracking just slightly. "That's enough. Trying is more than most people ever do." A new kind of leadership. That evening, as Maya sat in her apartment reflecting on her shift, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still uncertain. Her review date loomed, and the pressure to prove herself hadn't fully lifted. But for the first time she felt like she was in control of her own path, not just the expectations of others. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was an email from her supervisor, Claire Winslow, with the subject line Probation Review. Next steps. Maya opened it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a formal invitation for the review meeting that would take place in a week. But instead of anxiety, there was something else now. Resolve. The email didn't contain any hint of an impending decision, but Maya knew she had already come so far. The review would be just one more step in a long journey. But it was no longer just about keeping her job, it was about reaffirming her growth and her commitment to the work that truly mattered. Being the kind of person she could be proud of every single day. ######## The real test. As Maya prepared for the review meeting, she spent the final days leading up to it in deep reflection. The familiar voice of doubt still whispered in the back of her mind, asking if she had truly done enough to change. But she had learned to quiet that voice, replacing it with a stronger, more grounded one. She had to believe that the effort she had put in would be enough, not just for her review, but for her future. When the day of her meeting arrived, Maya stood tall in front of the conference room door, her heart racing not with fear, but with the anticipation of facing her truth. She knew this moment would define more than just her career. It would define the person she had worked so hard to become. She opened the door, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the journey would never truly end, but that each step forward was a victory in itself. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she stepped into the conference room, the coolness of the air-conditioned space contrasting with the warmth in her chest. It was an odd combination of calm and anxious anticipation. She had done everything she could to prepare for this moment. Her behavior, her actions, the strides she had made in her personal and professional growth, but now it was out of her hands. All that was left was to face the decision she had been dreading and yearning for all at once. The long, polished conference table was lined with Claire Winslow and the other executives, their expressions solemn but expectant. There was no hostility in the room, but there was an unspoken weight that Maya could feel pressing on her shoulders. She had worked so hard to get here, and yet now that she was at the precipice, the uncertainty of what would happen next was almost unbearable. Claire looked up from her notes, her gaze soft but measured. "Maya, thank you for coming in. Please take a seat." Maya nodded, her heart racing, and slowly lowered herself into the chair. Her mind flashed back to the first time she'd entered this room, her nerves almost paralyzing her as she felt out of place. Now it felt different, like she was fighting for something that was truly hers. "I'll get right to the point," Claire continued, folding her hands on the table in front of her. "We've reviewed your performance over the past several months. We've seen the significant changes in your approach to leadership, communication, and self-awareness. Most importantly, we've seen that you've made a genuine effort to confront the biases and behaviors that were hindering your growth and your role here at Horizon." Maya swallowed hard, trying to keep the wave of emotion at bay. Claire's words were kind, but they also carried a certain finality. She had worked so hard, and it was all coming down to this. Would it be enough? "I've had the opportunity to observe your progress firsthand," Claire said, her tone now turning more personal. "And I want to acknowledge that this has not been easy for you. I know it wasn't a comfortable path, and I know that there were times when you were frustrated with yourself. But I also know that you've made a real change. And that's why I believe in you, Maya." The words felt like a weight had been lifted off her chest, but there was still a part of her that was waiting for the final judgment. She had been given a second chance, but now there was a question that lingered. Would the opportunity be taken away if she faltered? ######The turning point. Claire paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I'm pleased to inform you that we have decided not only to continue your employment, but to promote you to a new leadership position within the company." Maya's breath caught in her throat, and for a brief moment she thought she had misheard. "A promotion," she whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "Yes," Claire confirmed with a nod, her eyes warm with encouragement. "We've seen your potential, Maya. And while you're not perfect, none of us are, We believe that you are ready to take on more responsibility. You've demonstrated that you're capable of leading with integrity, compassion, and a true understanding of what it means to support your team and your colleagues." Maya blinked, her mind racing. This wasn't just a second chance, it was a transformation, a complete shift from where she had been when she first walked through the doors of Horizon. She thought back to her early days, to the uncertainty and fear she had felt, the mistakes that had once seemed insurmountable. But now those missteps felt like distant memories. She had come so far, and she knew she wasn't done yet. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, her emotions threatening to overflow. "I don't know what to say. Thank you. I'll work hard to live up to this, to earn it." "You already have," Claire said gently, her gaze unwavering. "But remember, this isn't just about performance. It's about consistency. We're all on this journey together. Keep doing the work, and I have no doubt you'll continue to succeed." The words were both comforting and sobering. Maya knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the next step. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of pride, not just in the recognition but in herself. #######, the real test ahead. As the meeting ended, Maya stood and shook Claire's hand, her mind still spinning with the news. The promotion was a tangible validation of everything she had worked for, but it also meant that the expectations would only grow higher. There would be new challenges, new responsibilities, and an ever-increasing pressure to stay true to the lessons she had learned along the way. Walking out of the conference room, Maya found Kara waiting for her in the hallway. The older woman had a knowing look on her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Well?" Kara asked with a raised eyebrow, her tone light but expectant. Maya took a deep breath, her lips curling into a smile. "I got the promotion," she said, still in disbelief. Kara's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Maya saw a genuine warmth in her colleague's eyes. "I knew you would," Kara said quietly. "You've earned it." Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. For all the time she had doubted herself, Kara had believed in her, and that belief had been a lifeline. But even as the weight of the promotion settled into her chest, Maya knew that the real test was just beginning. This was not the culmination of her journey. It was simply another chapter. She would have to keep proving herself, keep growing, and keep embracing the challenges that came her way. And as she walked out into the crisp afternoon air, the world outside seemed different. The path ahead was no longer uncertain, but filled with possibility. She wasn't just a woman who had been given a second chance. She was someone who had chosen to change and to rise. The journey was far from over. But Maya knew now, with quiet confidence, that she was ready to face whatever came next.